As shocking information from Miami Camron and Jim Jones keeps coming in, the music industry has been completely upended. According to reports, Dipset's recognizable pillars have been detained after a furious confrontation behind the stage that left spectators astonished. Additionally, tales of the hip-hop culture being completely shocked are coming in from all directions, saying that the reunion was supposed to be a victory. The concert devolved into a full-scale conflict between two ex-brothers. Yes, you heard correctly. They threw fists. The aftermath and the harsh comments that were spoken. Anarchy. According to witnesses, it began as a contentious dispute about the performance order but swiftly turned into something far more sinister. Police lights flashing, broken equipment, broken egos. As cameras filmed, Camron and Jim were reportedly shackled and taken away in a matter of minutes. Exploded on social media. Many fans are surprised and wonder, is this truly Dipset's end? What might have perhaps caused such a public outburst between two legends? Be sure to pay attention since what follows isn't only startling. It's the kind of unfiltered emotional drama that nobody anticipated. And we assure you that this is only the start. It all began one evening. It should have been a celebration. The much-anticipated reunion of Dipset, Camron, Jim Jones, Jules, Santana, and Freaky Zeke had drawn large crowds of fans. With individuals wearing vintage Dipset merchandise, listening to old songs on their phones, and sharing anecdotes about how these musicians influenced a whole generation, the place was humming with nostalgia of hip-hop. However, no one was aware that tension had been brewing behind the scenes for weeks and would explode tonight in a manner that would alter everything. Around midnight, rumors started to circulate, and shortly after, frantic social media messages and video footage began to appear from backstage. Initially, it was difficult to discern what was happening. Blurry faces, muted shouts, and shaky film. However, one thing was evident. Jim Jones and Camron Run were engaged in a furious argument. It wasn't just words, however. Chairs were knocked over, tools were broken, and voices were amplified to an unbearable volume. Individuals observing the brothers found it hard to trust in videos. Previously inseparable, they were now engaged in a full-fledged altercation minutes before they were scheduled to take the stage with each other. Supporters were devastated, perplexed, and shocked. According to sources, the altercation started over something as little as a change without a set. It seems that Camron requested they keep to a traditional dip set, but Jim Jones wanted to start the concert with his solo single, We Fly High track. When old wounds were rekindled, what could have been a little argument descended into chaos. Jim accused Camron of always attempting to dominate the attention, to which Camron retaliated. Jim's betrayal and departure from the gang, while it was in decline, separate. Things rapidly got out of hand. There was a sense of security in the room. Guards. Despite the efforts of stylists and assistants to diffuse the tension, neither guy was backing down. Shivs became fists and insults became viz. One crew member compared it like seeing a family break apart in front of us. It wasn't simply a physical battle. It was sentimental. Things that had obviously been buried for years were uttered by both men. Jim told Camron, "You've always been jealous of me," after allegedly screaming, "You left me out to dry when I needed you the most." According to sources close to the group, they had previously made amends in public, but they never really worked things out behind closed doors. As the turmoil erupted tonight, Camron quickly undid all of the forced interviews and artificial grins. Fans out backstage front were becoming agitated. People were starting to chant since they didn't know what was going on, and the performance had been delayed for more than an hour. They had no idea that only a few feet away, their favorite musicians were being handcuffed. Security had phoned the police, and they had come, in informing staff members of a violent confrontation that had occurred. Hurt. One suffered a sprained lip, and the other a cracked lip. Wrist from attempting to break up Camron and Jim when the police showed there. They discovered that both rappers were still screaming at one another despite being clearly injured. They were yanked apart. Footage of their detention got viral quickly, and one of the crew members took a video. Camron's face was crimson with anger as he was led out in handcuffs. Soon after his chain tore his voice from shouting, Jim Jones came next. The two were escorted into separate police vehicles as the stunned audience outside the stadium looked on. Their names were chanted by fans. While some just captured the scene in startled stillness, others pleaded with them to stop. What could have been a victorious comeback had now become a nightmare. The news was taken up by media outlets in a matter of minutes. Headlines such as "The reunion of Dipset ends in pandemonium," with Jim Jones and Camron being jailed after a backstage altercation that inundated social media. Media outlets started posting old videos of the pair laughing together in interviews, thinking back on their relationship and contrasting it with the recent dramatic split. The treachery seemed intimate to a lot of fans. "We were reared by them. We grew up on Dipset," a Twitter user commented. The internet was ablaze with responses. Some astonished, some said, "This feels like our big brothers fighting." Jim and Camron did not speak to one another that night, and some people were furious, while others said they could have predicted this from a mile away inside the prison. Despite the prompt arrival of their legal teams, the harm had already been done when they were put in separate holding cells. According to others with knowledge of the matter, both men were disturbed not just by the altercation, but also by the realization of how far they had fallen. Jim Camron sat with his head down and continued to pace, questioning how everything had come to this point. Everything was the quiet after the storm, and it spoke more than any fist could. According to reports, Jill Santana, who was getting ready in his dressing area when the altercation started, attempted to someone on the crew claims that Jules yelled, "Not like this," but by the time he got to them, it was too late. He tried to mediate once he saw things becoming hot. "Man, not after everything that we've endured." As he saw two of his best friends being carried, his voice cracked. Taken away by police. According to sources, the picture disturbed him, and he broke down on stage and needed his crew to comfort him. The tour's sponsors immediately withdrew, fans demanded refunds, and concert producers started reassessing upcoming Dipset performances. They were already on thin, and industry insiders speculated that this may be the last nail in the coffin. According to one promoter, Ice warned, this could be the end. Social media only became more heated as drama lovers argued about who was at fault. Some accused Jim of being pushy and insecure, while others blamed Camron for being too controlling. Even in the thick of mayhem, there were voices appealing for peace. But regardless of the side individuals took, there was a strong understanding that it might be done. On social media, several musicians expressed their sorrow and hoped for peace. "Come on, dip up, y'all," one message said. "More than this. Before it's too late, fix it." Another person responded, "Hip-hop needs you all together, not divided." Such like this. However, as the dust cleared and the community attempted to comprehend what had happened, it was unclear whether Camron and Jim would hear those words. Simply occurred, one thing was for sure. The world would never be the same. And something surprising occurred the next morning, just when everyone believed the drama had peaked. And something surprising occurred the next morning, just when everyone believed the drama had peaked. A voicemail leak started making the rounds on the internet. The message was purportedly recorded by Jim Jones while he was still being held in prison, barely hours after the altercation. Jim said in a low, weary, and hurt voice. He spoke slowly, as if each syllable were burdening him. "I'm not even angry at Camron. I'm upset with myself," he continued, "because we let the supporters down." Deep it down. By midday, the tape, which first no one could verify was authentic, had taken around like wildfire. Major hip-hop Jim Jones regrets everything, and the end of Dipset hits harder than we thought, was one of the captions that sites were publishing, and fans were ambivalent. Hearing the remorse in his speech, some felt pity. Others wondered whether the message was a shrewd attempt to get money. Popular support. However, the situation behind the scenes was far more chaotic than anybody had anticipated. Chaden made a public statement. Not a single Instagram story, tweet, or even cryptic post. People close to him claimed that he was incensed not just about the altercation, but also about how swiftly damage control had begun at Jim's camp. He believes Jim is attempting to distort the facts. According to an insider, Camron feels deceived once again. Jules Santana, meantime, was trying all he could to prevent a total collapse. He started baiting both factions by reaching out to them, to speak with me to resolve the matter. However, Jim and Camron weren't prepared. Both of them were too emotional, overtaken by years of unsolved conflict. Freaky Zeke, who had always been the comedic relief, even became silent. In a brief statement, his team expressed his great sadness over the occurrences and urged time to recover. What caused even worse, the altercation had reopened existing scars in the hip-hop scene in addition to hurting Dipset. Artists who have previously looked up to the group and started talking. A few expressed their dissatisfaction. Others shared tales of previous conflicts they'd observed directly. An unnamed producer claimed on a blog that he had seen Camron and Jim quarrel about money years before. The brotherhood had been disintegrating for a while, according to a recorded session. Abruptly, The unity illusion that Dipset had attempted to maintain came tumbling to a halt. The security footage followed. Late that evening, a fresh video from the backstage security camera of the venue. This fan film footage was more clear than the others. It displayed the scene when Jim swung back and knocked over a table after Camron pushed him into a stack of speaker cases. The violence was quiet, but it was obvious. When their heroes acted in this manner, fans were appalled. Additional video saw crew members rushing to break up the altercation, with a security officer pushing Camron back into a wall and Jules coming in to attempt to pull Jim away. #tips set a plummet and Wahar cams him became popular news hashtags when the video rekindled the internet. Outlets jumped on it, dissecting each frame as if it were a sports replay. Experts in body language even believe that Camron's posture revealed a deep-seated dissatisfaction. As Jim's motion exposed emotional fragility, it turned into a spectacle for the media. Memes went viral. Requests for interviews were made, and discussion programs even began to mention the battle. Although it was the week's most significant pop culture event, the repercussions were becoming more apparent behind the scenes. The label Everything was put on hold to finance the Dipset tour. Contracts were frozen, future events were canceled, and all reunion-related goods was taken off the shelf. According to one source, the situation is a financial catastrophe. Jim was accused by the Camron team, claiming everything had been damaged by his rage. Camron was criticized by Jim's crew, who described him as dominating and manipulative, and apprehended dozens of tech crew workers and staff dancers who had been depending on the tour for their jobs were in the center. Suddenly unemployed, Camron, known his ferocious clapbacks and harsh tongue, eventually broke his quiet. 2 days later, he shared a single message on a blank screen on Instagram. Silence may sometimes speak louder than words. The fans were perplexed. Was there any shade? Was it approved? Was that the last chapter in the remarks? There was a lot of speculation. A ceasefire was pleaded for by some. Others yelled Camron's passive-aggressive behavior. "We're supposed to be legends, not a headline," Jim Jones stated during a brief, very upset Instagram Live. "I'm embarrassed by my behavior. I lost my temper, but I'm not alone." This, predictably, only made things worse. Jim was accused of gaslighting by Camron supporters. Jim was supported by his supporters who said, at least he was owning up. In the middle of all this turmoil, Dipset's legacy was gradually coming apart. Unsure about how the audience would react, radio stations removed Dipset songs from their daily playlists. Respond. Some podcasts claimed that this was the most public group breakdown since MUA, and whole programs were devoted to the argument. Others likened it to June in the autumn. "This is what happens when ego goes unchecked for too long," one presenter said. Then the greatest twist of all occurred. One lady came forward and said she saw the altercation and that it wasn't even about music. It has to do with a lady. She said that Camron and Jim Jones had a romantic relationship, connected to the same lady throughout the years, and new information has resurfaced that tension. According to her, Jim found out Camron had surreptitiously got back in touch with her, which is what caused the dispute. Backstage. Her narrative was untrue, but the internet didn't care. It burst once again because it was spicy, scandalous, and the precise type of twist that followers love in memes. Now, presenting the battle, people made jokes about Dipset becoming the next reality television drama, describing it as a failed love triangle. Others voiced their displeasure, stating that two legendary should never disregard decades of history because of a woman. But whether the anecdote was accurate or not, it altered the story again. They weren't only seeing a group disintegrate. They were unable to turn away from the lives they were seeing unfold in real time, right now. Jim and Camron were both out on bond, but they were also required by the court to avoid one another until the matter was settled. Men who hadn't traveled weren't blind to the irony. Now the world couldn't be in the same room together. There were attorneys engaged. The hip-hop community was waiting to see what would happen as damage control crews worked non-stop. In a radio broadcast, a seasoned performer said, "This ain't beef. This is heartbreak." However, just when everything seemed to be at its lowest point, a phone call came as a surprise, one that nobody anticipated and that would forever alter the course of events. Days went by as many waited. Behind the scenes, emotions were rising in expectation. It was not only their own poultry that Camron and Jim Jones had to contend with. They were coping with the fallout from their deeds. Opinions on what had transpired were split among fans, the press, and even their innermost circles. In fact, nobody could really predict Dipset's destiny. Could what remained of their legacy be saved? Or had the harm been finished? Unusually silent after the event, Camron, who is renowned for having a calm demeanor, his social media accounts, usually full of jokes and cryptic messages, it had become oddly quiet. Supporters, especially those who had been with him for years, were beginning to worry. Camron was unlike anything they had ever seen. He was usually the one to transform a dramatic issue into something amusing by making it seem insignificant. However, his posts were devoid of humor this time. Even though he wasn't blogging, his silence spoke more than words. However, he may have added that Jim Jones was more outspoken. The issue was the subject of several remarks on his Twitter page, expressing regret to Camron as well as to followers and supporters. Although it's been a difficult journey, I'm developing and learning. Fans weren't quite persuaded despite his tweets. He was commended by some for admitting his errors, while others believed it was a ploy to get back the affection he had lost. Sincere guys own up to their mistakes. A fan wrote, "But it doesn't change the fact that the damage is done. But we won't forget what happened, Jim." The conflicting responses only seemed to stoke the flames. Nevertheless, there was a feeling of inevitable outcome in spite of the drama and public split. The major issue of whether the Dipset separation was permanent was still hanging over everything. Did one of the most recognizable hip-hop ensembles ever come to an end? Some sources said that Camron and Jim Jones had not communicated in days, while others suggested that a reconciliation was possible, but only under certain circumstances. Rumors were rife, were fulfilled. Supporters were divided. Some people continued to trust in the group's strength and the connection that had united them. Years in the past. Others were deeply disturbed by the betrayal of their devotion. Jules Santana, meantime, who had always been the stuck in the midst of it all as the mediator between the two. According to others close to him, Jules felt wounded and upset by the whole thing. He had spent so much time trying to maintain harmony between Jim and Cam. All of that labor now seemed to be coming undone. Jules, however, was adamant about putting things right, despite his irritation. He was aware that if there was any chance of reconciliation, he had to be the first. Jules decided to handle things himself. He made contact with Jim Jones and Camron, attempting to set up a private meeting separately. He was aware that it had to be in person. No more calls, no other mysterious messages, it has to be authentic. Jules was prepared to go to any lengths to keep Dipset safe. Jules was able to bring Camron and Jim Jones together after a few tough days. It was a historic occasion. It was the two had decided to talk for the first time after the altercation. But there was tension in the air when they eventually sat down. Camron was oddly silent for someone who was renowned for his quick wit and sharp tongue. But Jim Jones was more forthcoming. He had been considering the repercussions of his actions, and he was prepared to deal with them all. There was an awkward atmosphere in the room. The two guys sat opposite from one another in quiet. The air was thick with the weight of their past and their recent breakup. The stillness was finally broken by Camron. Although he spoke steadily, there was an indisputable edge to his voice. "You understand, I never imagined I'd be sitting here with you after what happened. You disrespected me," Jim stated gently, "not just in front of admirers, but also in front of relatives. That was painful," Jim Jones answered with obvious remorse. "I want to make things right now, even though I know I can't go back. Camron, I want us to get beyond this. I apologize." For a time, Camron seemed to consider his choices. Before there was a lengthy silence. "You said that before Jim," he said, but it was obvious that there was still a great deal of pain and distrust between them. Actions speak louder than words. However, as the seemed like they could make amends. They reminisced, laughed, and for a minute, it seemed as if they were talking about their shared past of the times when Deepe was at the top of the rap game. "We're once again working together in the studio, creating magic." But reality quickly revealed that the harm had already been done, and that the path to recovery wouldn't be simple. In the meanwhile, fans were still waiting for James Camron and Jim Jones to make a public remark, and the suspense was killing them. Fans turned to social media to ask questions about if Dipset was really over, or whether the two might work things out. People are clamoring for an update. "We want to know what's happening. Is the Dipset over? You both hurt the fans," one fan said on Twitter. "You must now correct this." The pressure was increasing. It was not possible for Camron and Jim Jones to remain hidden indefinitely. At last, Camron shared afresh the greatest connections are sometimes put to the test. "This little Instagram remark conveyed a lot, we'll work it out. Jim, stay tuned. We've been through a lot." Jones responded with a message of his own, saying, We're stronger than this. We've been down too long. Stay tuned. Although these messages didn't provide followers with specific answers, they did give them hope that perhaps, after all, Dipset wasn't finished. But the issue still stood. Was it too little? Too late? And could the fans overlook the public spectacle that was the battle and the betrayal? Or had Jim Jones and Camron gone too far and irreparably harmed the group? Only time would tell. The hip-hop community kept a careful eye on the story as it developed, but for the time being, everything was still up in the air. Camron and Jim Jones, two legends who had previously dominated the rap scene together, were now battling for their legacy. Would they be able to get beyond their differences, or would it be too late? The hip-hop community was shook to its core as word of the backstage altercation spread like wildfire. Jim Jones and Camron, two of the original members of the renowned group, no one could have foreseen the violent altercation in which Dipset was engaged, leaving fans, media outlets, and even their colleagues in the profession stunned horror as the fight's specifics came to light, and what had begun as a festive evening swiftly descended into mayhem, suddenly seeming to be the future. Years of unresolved frustrations between the two were alleged to have spurred the backstage incident, which soon escalated while Dipset itself was in prison party. Artists. Words were reportedly exchanged, and then there was a physical incident, which resulted in Jim Jones and Camron being jailed on the spot. Both rappers reportedly threw fists and created an unmissable sight, making the scenario characterized as heated. Security had to intervene according to witnesses at the scene, but the damage was already done. In addition to leaving a lasting impression on the occasion, the altercation left fans questioning if the two legendary personalities could ever mend their strained relationship in the days following after thereafter. Reports about what caused the brawl started to circulate like wildfire. Some people said it was a personal disagreement between the two, while some suggested that there were more serious problems inside the group. The fans who had previously seen Jim Jones and Camron as brothers were now forced to consider the loyalty that had previously characterized Dipset. Would they ever be able to get back together after this open act of violence? Or was this the last nail in the coffin that would permanently destroy the group's legacy? While some fans remained optimistic, others resorted to social media to share the end of an era is a letdown. One tweet said, "Babette was the greatest, but if they can't even get along, what hope do we have?" Similar feelings were expressed in the comments as fans tried to comprehend the abrupt demise of one of hip-hop's most significant figures. Organizations for years, and now their disagreement was tarnishing all they had created. Camron and Jim Jones had been the faces of Dipset. Camron, who never backs down from controversy, posted a number of statements on social media about the incident. "Some individuals will never change," he said, adding that despite his best efforts to keep the peace, the betrayal he experienced was too great to overlook. "I did my part, but when you continuously," his stern statements, "have to watch your back, it's time to move on," appeared to validate the widespread suspicion that Dipset as a group was no longer a viable institution. However, Jim Jones was not prepared to give up just yet, despite the fact that Camron's message seemed to mark the end of an era. Jim Jones, however, adopted a more reserved stance, posting a remark that alluded to the situation, although his emotions were obviously running high. Potential for reconciliation. "Together, we've experienced too much to allow one argument to define who we are." When he wrote, "I'm not all set to go." Not quite yet. His remarks gave admirers who continued to trust in his relationship a glimpse of optimism. And Camron. Would the two icons be able to set aside their disagreements and reestablish what they had previously shared, or as events unfolded? The media started to weigh in, with some outlets taking sides and others staying neutral. Was the damage irreparable? News channels, podcasts, and hip-hop websites all offered their opinions on the situation, with many asking whether the public argument was a short-term setback or a long-term fracture. The timing of the incident was especially concerning since Dipset fans had been waiting for years to see the trio perform live again, and now it seemed as if they were getting ready to go on a much-anticipated reunion tour. In an exclusive interview, Jules Santana, who had always been stuck between Camron and Jim, said that Dream was becoming more and farther away. When Jones's disagreements surfaced, he vented his annoyance and said he had done all he could to maintain harmony between the two. But it was obvious that both men had come to their weak spots. "We were brothers, man," Jules stated in an emotional tone. "But sometimes things shift. Individuals evolve. Something that no longer exists can't be forced." The melancholy and inevitable nature of the situation were reflected in his statements. It seemed as if the family that had been Dipset was disintegrating. The pressure on Camron and Jim Jones increased as the fight's public repercussions grew. There was disagreement among their admirers, with some saying expressed despair and rage, while others continued to hope for a solution. "Sit back, we need dips. They were the best and let this be the end," one admirer said on Instagram, but as time passed, it became more and more obvious that this was more than a little argument. Deeper problems were involved, and these were difficult to overlook or forget. Jim Jones and Camron had to face their internal demons, underlying resentments, and past grudges as they attempted to deal with the fallout from the altercation. Sensations of betrayal started to emerge. It was obvious that ego, pride, and miscommunication were causing what had once been a fraternity based on loyalty and trust to fall apart. That achieving reconciliation would not be a simple task. And even the most hopeful supporters started to lose hope. The problem kept getting worse. Additionally, in the days that followed speculation about Dipset's world's future, several reports said that Camron had already begun. Others claimed that Jim Jones was thinking about pursuing a solo career, while others were working on new songs without him. Neither rapper has acknowledged or refuted these claims. Rumors. However, as more time went by, it became evident that the group's future was dubious. It became clear that after Camron and Jim Jones both shared cryptic messages on social media, Dipseta's supporters realized it was no longer the dominant force. Camron's statement, which essentially confirmed that their working relationship was terminated, said, "There's no love lost, but sometimes you have to let go." Jim Jones sent a similar message. "It's time to move on. Sometimes moving is more important than being correct. Continue." Fans were devastated by their remarks, but they also accepted that Dipset was no longer a viable band. The consequences of the altercation backstage had been enormous. Additionally, while Camron and Jim Jones had always been close, their altercation had shown that even the strongest ties amongst Dipset devotees might be severed. It marked the end of a time that had been characterized by innovative music, treasured memories, and an unquestionable cultural influence. However, as the narrative came to an end on Dipset 1, the question was still whether Camron and Jim Jones would ever make amends. Time would tell. For the time being, however, it seemed like Dipset was really finished. What a roller coaster of emotions coaster, huh? Jim Jones and Camron. Fans are in shock about the backstage altercation and the future. A Fabset is unsure, with all the heartache, treachery, and drama. What are your thoughts? Do you think Jim Jones and Camron can ever make amends? Or is this Dipset's last demise? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. We would want to speak with you. If the dramatic turn of events caught you off guard, remember to like this video. And for more breaking news, click the subscribe button. We'll keep you informed of any new information on Camron, Jim Jones, and his future. Disappointed. Additionally, if you really love Dipset, you won't want to miss what's next. Press the alert ring to ensure you don't miss any exciting